Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me is Phil McKenzie. Phil, there were fights last week. There's fights next week. This is how we live, and this is how we are going to die. How you doing?
Not too bad. I think last week's card overperformed against very modest expectations, so modest that we didn't preview it at all. And next week's card looks better, particularly the fight at the top of the card, which is really awesome.
So let's just give the rundown of what we're going to talk about today. That upcoming card, definitely stronger than the one we just had, and at least in terms of on paper. The main event that Phil spoke of, Rafael dos Anjos, fresh off of that upset win, I think, over Kevin Lee, reminding us all of just how good Rafael dos Anjos is. He's taking on Leon Edwards, and I agree, that is an intensely fascinating fight. I don't know if it'll be super exciting, but I always find Edwards' fights to be interesting. Like when he's fighting a guy like Donald Cerrone, who is trying to make something happen, and it's up to Edwards to neutralize and respond and sort of tailor the fight as it plays out. I enjoy that. So I think RDA is going to be definitely tireless and aggressive enough that Edwards is going to have to make some decisions. Also on this card is a bunch of other crap, but more importantly, James Vick versus Dan Hooker. That's a very compelling fight. Another lightweight bout. I'm really interested in this one. Alexandra Hernandez versus Francisco Trinaldo. Another, young versus old matchup there. I think those are the three that we're probably going to focus on for our previews this week because, as we said, as Phil said rather, last week's card overperformed. It was a lot better than we expected it to be. Some people watching it were saying that they were hating it and that it was boring and tedious. It had some dull points, but I actually found a lot of these fights to be pretty interesting. So, among that number, not exactly sure how many we're going to get to discuss, but there's the very quick main event between Jermaine Gerondimi and Aspen Ladd and the questionable stoppage there. Also, perhaps a questionable stoppage in the co-main event. Urijah Faber notches a surprising win as a 40-year-old man over a fighter who, in a lot of ways, appeared to be just a younger version of him. Josh Emmett knocked out Mirsad Bektic in the first round. Andre Fili knocked out Shaman Moraes in the first round. Juliana Pena and Nico Montano had actually what I thought was a pretty entertaining grappling and wrestling battle. And of course, the star of the evening, Ryan Hall, had one of the weirdest and yet most impressive fights I've ever seen with Darren Elkins, in which he just roundly out-kickboxed Darren Elkins and knocked him down 2 or 3 times with a variety of spinning wheel kicks and perfectly timed straight lefts down the center. So we're going to get to as much of that as we can. I promise you we will talk about Elkins Hall, though, because that's one of my favorite fights I've seen in ages. It was so bizarre. I can't wait to discuss it. Now let's start off with the welterweights before we get there. Dos Anjos, Edwards. Phil, you want to take the lead on this one?
So this is probably one of the best pure skill matchups you can make in the division, if not actually maybe like the best pure skill matchup you can make in the division. I think Kamaru Usman, with all due respect to him, is a extremely powerful man who is very, very good in one particular area. But I would say that he's probably not as skillful a striker as these men. We haven't seen as much kind of diversity from him, in part because we haven't had to. We've never had to see what Kamaru Usman's game off his back looks like, for example. So yeah, I mean, this is really as good as it gets in this division. But I do think that it's a fight which may be problematic for Leon Edwards because he's really made his way in this division as someone who can always beat you somewhere and someone who is a very cerebral fighter. So, we've called him out before as being the rare example of what people thought MMA would be back in the day. You'd be good enough at wrestling and good enough at striking and good enough at submissions and all these other kind of things that you'd be able to attack the other guy where they were weakest. And few people actually tend to do that. People just tend to, pick a certain skill set to be good at and then leverage it as best they can. But he is actually someone who will out-wrestle strikers and outstrike wrestlers. And this might be a problem if you don't have a significant skill edge over someone phases. In any one of those areas.
Yeah.
And I think there's two fighters in this division where that would be the case, and it is RDA and it is Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Go on.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the. I think so. That's the basic dynamic. Is that he needs to find can he find somewhere where he has a skill edge, and if so, kind of where is that? Because he's been a very willing wrestler. He's been excellent in the clinch. It's where he got significant amounts of work done against Cerrone and
Gunnar Nelson.
Cerrone and Gunnar Nelson. Yeah, but. Can he do that against RDA? RDA is a very violent, very active clinch fighter. And so the other question is, how much can his pace hold up against against 5 rounds of Rafael dos Anjos? Because we've seen that Edwards in that Cerrone fight, for example, he was able to beat Cerrone up fairly convincingly in the early going, but it did become more competitive over time. Cerrone was able to work his way back into the fight. Yeah. And this has been something of an issue for Edwards. He's not a dynamite, offensive threat anywhere.
Brian Barberena knocked him down, I think, in the 3rd round of their fight as well, with an uppercut after roundly losing the first 2.
Yep. So it has to be a question of, if he can't find he needs either a major skill edge, but if he doesn't have one, even at parity, can he withstand RDA's pace? And I'm not sure that he can. So what's your feeling, Connor?
I'm sort of trending the same way. The main thing that I had fixated on coming into this matchup was the clinch. I think that's been a really, really important transitional phase for Leon Edwards in most of his fights. He's not only did he do damage to Cerrone and Nelson in the clinch, but it's a range that Leon Edwards needs. He is not comfortable trading more than 2 punches at a time in range. You know what I mean? He's, for different reasons, he's much more explosive and athletic, but similar constraint to John Jones. The clinch is there to negate the prolonged exchange that you would otherwise face against a determined pressure fighter who can get into range and stay there and make you fight with him. I think RDA is he's certainly capable of doing that. If Brian Barberena gave Leon Edwards some trouble, then the pace and the craft and the output of Dos Anjos and the form on that output, just the technical form on all of his strikes, that's a much bigger hurdle. And then against that, I think Edwards would need the clinch to be a safe zone even more. He would need that to be a place that he could go to, because how the hell else? You can't just back away from RDA all day. I mean, you can. Edwards has good footwork and everything, but I don't think it's going to work out too well for him, and nor is it going to look too good for the judges. So yeah, I think that clinch is to borrow the Greg Jackson parlance, that is the key node in this fight. That is the one area of this fight I think that Edwards' success or failure hinges on. And yeah, my feeling is kind of that RDA is just better there, or at the very least, he is not going to be vulnerable there in the same way that Gunnar Nelson and Donald Cerrone were. That is a range in which he's very comfortable, fairly defensively sound, but also extremely active and offensively potent. So it's not a place you can just go in there and expect to have a minute to think before breaking away and landing a strike. It is a place where if you go there to escape the exchanging will continue. And I don't think Edwards likes that. I don't think that's good for him at all.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's possibly some... There are some advantages for Edwards, but I'm not sure if I can really rely on them in the same way that I might like to if I wanted to pick him. Like, I think he is probably, like, Dos Anjos can, I think more and more these days, be convinced into mid-range kickboxing matches where he's just going to be trading shots. So I think when I think about this, it's probably the fight with Tony Ferguson, because that fight to me always felt somewhat atypical in that Ferguson was able to kind of set up a defensive barrier of just long punches and parries, which surprisingly RDA was willing to just kind of accept that he was going to go back into a kind of pot-shotting trading match. And I think Edwards is a much better counterpuncher than RDA is.
Yeah, he's maybe the best counterpuncher RDA has faced since Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah.
So,
and I think he's good in a vacuum, and also like when he's up against the fence, like when a single shot is coming at him, he's actually very defensively responsible and has a good variety of like right hook, generally left hand, but he has a good variety of counter punches to come back with. So I think if he can find some way of convincing RDA to have a long range kickboxing match with him, and he showed against Cerrone that his kick defense is also, it's pretty sound. He's not a guy who's just going to get punted to death at range like, for example, Alexander Hernandez was. He was willing to, check, exchange, and counter off kicks. I think that's a path to victory for him. Yeah. But again, it's one where I need to see him winning that kind of pace fight before I can give it to him, because it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not hugely challenging to outpace Gunnar Nelson. Many people have done it.
Right. That's the way to beat him.
Yeah, Donald Cerrone. That was impressive, but it wasn't necessarily slipping away, but it wasn't. He did better early than he did late.
Let us not forget that also, I don't think just due to Edwards' activity, though it had something to do with it, Cerrone also just looked like shit in that fight. Mm-hmm. He was really off, so that's also, like, again, it's still a very impressive win. I love Leon Edwards. I'm really not trying to trash him. I've been following this dude really closely, basically since his UFC debut. But I think you pointed to the defense. Like, I do think that may be one of the defining characteristics of Edwards' style. Like, the reason he's able to be such a well-rounded fighter is that he is defensively good everywhere. Like even in the wrestling defense against Kamaru Usman, remember, before his wrestling was what it is now, he was remarkably difficult to take down for a guy with his almost purely striking background. So that's something that he can work with to sort of neutralize RDA. And that is a concern, that RDA is not really the pressure fighter that he used to be when he fought Eddie Alvarez, but also, like, could RDA have beaten Eddie Alvarez if he didn't put tons of pressure on him and walk into a counter? He still might have been able to. Like, RDA is still a really excellent kicker. He is more than ever really good at the boxing thing. He's got a great jab. He's got increasingly good head movement, his combination punching, his body work. So I don't know. Like, I think Edwards would have to be really, really active with his jab. I think he would have to be constantly evasive, like just checking every attempt to attack. But he'd have to be really on the ball with making sure he counters at the right moments to get that pace out of RDA. Unless RDA just comes into this fight having accepted a slow pace already, which would be weird and a bad idea, but maybe not completely out of sorts for him.
Yeah, unfortunately, this does not really seem like the kind of win-win matchmaking that the UFC likes, because I'm not really sure what they do with RDA off a win. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult to get him into any kind of title contention, but, maybe they just want Edwards out of there. He doesn't seem to, he doesn't have incredibly exciting fights. He doesn't seem to get the social media fired up. Maybe they just want to clear him out so they can get other people to fight, because... yeah, if Edwards wins, that's a tremendous win. And he is almost, he's still then going to be stuck behind both Masvidal and Covington.
That would be one of the greatest win streaks in the UFC today, if he beat RDA here, like undeniably.
Yeah, and he would probably have to fight someone else afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, if RDA wins, I mean, I have no idea.
Then I guess, I mean, they're probably just thinking if RDA wins, that's better anyway. Because Edwards is not, people don't care. Unfortunately, people just don't care about fighters like Leon Edwards. And RDA probably still has some name recognition. He's more exciting as a rule. And if you can bring up some other prospect to beat him, that's a more valuable win than having to get past Leon Edwards anyway. Like, it's just more utilitarian to have a Dos Anjos stuck in the middle of your ranks to let other fighters build their careers off of than it is to have a Leon Edwards who is not exciting anyone but spoiling everyone else's careers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that there's so many guys in this division who are crying out for opportunities as well. There's, Zaleski dos Santos, there's Vicente Luque.
He just got a fight booked, didn't he?
What's that? Yeah, he got booked against the Leech, which shows you how much they value him.
I mean, amazing fight, but no, I think you're right. Yeah, it was the Leech. Incredibly fun fight, but yeah, it's welterweight, man.
But yeah, I mean, but this fight should be amazing just on its merits, I think, is one of the things to really take away from it. I mean, can't really emphasize more, the depth of skill on display can only be, like, the total depth of skill in the octagon, I think, is only going to be equaled if you put Jorge Masvidal in there with one of these guys. And yeah, I think it's still it's just a tough matchup for Edwards. Even looking back at the people he's historically struggled with, Kamaru Usman, who basically just bullied him into the fence, and Claudio Silva, a big clunky dude who just bullied him into the fence. Like, the guys he's beaten in the meantime are actually pretty diverse and really interesting collection of guys, but none of them you could really define as pressure fighters.
Yeah, no. Barberena is maybe the most pressure fighter, and as I said, by the third round, that fight was starting to tilt a little bit more in his favor. And
he sort of dropped Edwards, who then got up and went back to kicking the shit out of him. Yeah. But it was
something, and RDA he's just better than Brian Barberena.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not a great sign. It still suggests that the same weaknesses are there given the right approach and an opponent skilled enough to pull it off. But that's the interesting thing about this fight. I want to see these fucking skill sets clash, man. All right, I think that's it. Both of us picking RDA, is that right?
Yep, think so.
Okay. Well, let's move on. When we come back from this break, James Vick versus Dan Hooker, Alex Hernandez versus Francisco Masaranduba Trinaldo after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Yeah. Does James Vick have better striking defense than Dan Hooker? We should be having this discussion in the segment, actually.
Yeah, let's just go.
This is all valid. All right, folks, welcome back. Segment 2 here, and we were already getting wrapped up in a discussion of these next two fights we have to discuss. They are both difficult picks. They are both, I mean, it has to be said, from one perspective, they're both very well-matched fights. Really, really difficult to call. The first one, James Vick versus Dan Hooker. In a minute, we're going to talk about Alex Hernandez versus Francisco Trinaldo. But, Phil, what were we just saying about Vick Hooker? I mean, both of these dudes have been wrecked in their most recent fights. They have been absolutely reduced to a puddle by their most recent opponents. Neither of them has a whole lot of experience against a fighter like the other, looking at their records. You know, like the rangiest guys Dan Hooker has fought were featherweights, Yair Rodriguez and Hatsuhioki. But James Vick has just fought a bunch of short dudes. And I think both of these guys really excel at fighting short dudes. You know, like James Vick is the tall guy who can guillotine you from the clinch no matter what position you're working for. Dan Hooker's the guy who can introduce your chin to his knee if you duck or slip or level change in front of him. Both of these guys are tall fighters that excel at fighting short guys. Now, usually, I will say, when these types of guys meet in MMA, it's usually a really fun and interesting fight, in my experience. Long, tall strikers suddenly facing someone who can interrupt their usual zone of safety, their usual safe range. But how the hell do you pick this fight? That is the question.
Yeah, so, I mean, okay, if we think of their sort of similar enough opponents, I think that it does tend to lean towards James Vick. He's fought Valmir Lazaro, who is at least like a range kickboxer, and did reasonably well, and won. And
I miss Valmir Lazaro. I used to love that
guy. Yeah, he was good fun. And meanwhile, Dan Hooker has kind of struggled with... He wasn't really winning that Hatsuhioki fight, and also with Yair Rodriguez. I mean, in general, this seems like a fight between... Yeah, so as you mentioned, these guys, two guys very much configured to fight against short people. I feel like Vick is probably a little better configured to deal with long people, to deal with rangy outfighters. Francisco Trinaldo is not tall, but he definitely fights from a very long range. And Vick approached him pretty smartly. And the problem with Hooker is that he has a wonderful collection of tools for dealing with level changes. Uppercuts up the middle, stepping knees, all this other kind of stuff. But he had a fight against Edson Barboza where the game plan to fight against Edson Barboza has been very, very heavily established. And it's not entirely dissimilar to the game plan for fighting James Vick.
Yeah.
And he flopped on that really badly.
Justin Gaethje did it to both of them, just for some simple MMA math. Yeah.
Like, push him into the fence, and then, you know, the Vic specific thing is that you can kick his lead leg because he's a boxer rather than a kickboxer, and then just try and clobber him as he moves away with his hands down. So yeah, I mean, I think that Hooker is probably a more durable and probably athletic fighter. He's got more of a chance of finishing a fight with one punch.
Yeah.
But it does seem like he hasn't shown I feel like Vick has shown the ability to fight long-range opponents where Hooker just kind of... He really kind of hasn't. I mean, that Rodriguez fight was even... That was before there was a huge, Yair hype train, and before that hype train crashed and then came back and all that other stuff. But it was still a shockingly bad performance from Hooker.
Yeah.
And I'm still not convinced that he can just close range on people effectively.
I mean, I do still think that fight was the beginning of a development period for Hooker. You know, that was absolutely the wrong opponent to try that style against. But before Rodriguez... he was largely an aggressive clinch fighter. That was his tall man's game, was to just press forward and grab people by the head. You know, he had an incredibly entertaining fight with Maximo Blanco, where he failed to make that work. And it was right after that he fought Hioki and Rodriguez. And in both of those, he was trying the range thing out. Maybe that was because of the frames of his opponents. That probably had something to do with it. But ever since then, Hooker has not been a swarming clinch fighter. And I do think he's gotten better at the actual range fighting aspect of it. He's certainly developed a jab that is actually functional. But I think your point stands, that Vick is... Both of these guys excel at fighting short guys, using their height, but I think Vick has proven better at using his length over the course of his career. He knocked out Joe Duffy by dropping him into an uppercut with a pawing jab at very long range. I think he's also a significantly better kicker than Hooker. Hooker's really awkward with his kicks, actually. His knees are nice, but, like, he doesn't seem to have the body mechanics to twist himself into kicks all that well.
I would say this is a pretty common thing with both of them, that they're both just janky kickers who can, like, it works every now and again. You know, I mean, Hooker, it was a head kick that finished Hioki, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I think they're both sort of willing kickers, if not particularly devastating.
Yeah, but Vic's chin, and he cuts too much weight. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hooker's definitely the more like dynamic party, one who's much more likely to find a finish.
Yeah, but also if like Hooker crashes into the clinch, like I don't really see him beating Vic there.
I mean, Vic still has absurd confidence in his chin in exchanges where perhaps he shouldn't, because he's a reasonably accurate puncher. But, you know, a lot of the time you will see him, like, moving backwards, and he'll just be looking at the other guy and just trying to punch him 3 times with his chin up in the air.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think he'll still have it after the Gaethje fight? But then I forgot the Felder fight was after the Gaethje fight.
Yeah. Like, James Vick strikes me as being a very insanely confident person. And yeah, so I mean, I think there's a solid chance that Hooker just wrecks him in a punching exchange, which Vic is far too overconfident in.
Hooker might also be shot. Just saying. There's a chance that, like, I'd much rather have Justin Gaethje knock me out with a single punch than withstand 3 rounds of what Edson Barboza did to Dan Hooker. Just saying, those things do matter. We will be getting to talking about Darren Elkins and his awful performance against Ryan Hall, and I have a feeling that his many, prolonged torture sessions with bigger, stronger fighters will have had some effect on that. So I don't know. There's a lot of vague reasons to pick Vic here, but that's the thing. It's a really tough fight to call. I just think Vic is sharper from long range. He only has a 1-inch reach advantage, so the actual frames aren't going to matter that much. But I don't fucking know. Like, is it harder to pull Joe Duffy into a counter uppercut than it is to pull Ross Pearson into a knee?
Yes, I think so. I think at that stage in their careers, yes, Joe Duffy was definitely a much better boxer than Ross Pearson.
Yeah. All right. James Vick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want him to win.
No.
I would definitely rather see Dan Hooker win, but...
Yes. Dan Hooker seems like a lovely man.
Yeah, he seems super awesome.
Well, hopefully Israel Adesanya has helped him sharpen up that aspect of his game or something.
Yeah, he seems... I mean, they both seem like reasonably thoughtful guys as well, so it'll be interesting to see how they both address what flaws they can see in the other guy.
Yeah, it just, that thoughtfulness, it hasn't mattered when Hooker has faced really tough stylistic challenges pretty much ever. So I don't really see him adapting his style here. And likewise for Vic. So yeah, I guess I will agree with you and settle for Vic, but I don't know. Now let's have a very similarly unsatisfying discussion about one that I actually think is an even more interesting fight. Alex Hernandez versus Francisco Trinaldo. Hernandez sort of in a similar position to the last 2 guys we discussed, having just suffered his big crushing debut defeat, basically. Francisco Trinaldo coming off of a win over a very shot Evan Dunham. Don't know how much momentum really matters for these guys, but the stylistic matchup here is what really interests me. Hernandez is an intensely physical fighter. So far in the UFC, that has been his defining characteristic. It's what has made him like a ranked fighter. Because skill-wise, he still has a long way to go in a lot of areas, specifically with the striking, when it comes to, defending himself, to feinting, to countering. He is very much a throw everything really, really hard and try to overwhelm the other guy breed of striker. But we've also seen really strong wrestling and scrambling ability from him. And I do think his wrestling game is actually all right. At the very least, I like to see people who are consistently good with their head position and tie-ups. And Hernandez pretty roundly beat Olivier Aubin-Mercier in the clinches. And that was pretty impressive. So we're looking at a very physical guy who's probably, in my read, a little better with his wrestling and on the ground than he is with his striking. And he's here against a guy in Francisco Trinaldo who is also very physically imposing, but is specifically good at counterpunching and winning in exchanges with people. So once again, I think there's a node in this fight where Hernandez is going to run into specific trouble, even if I think he has the advantages and the pace to probably win this fight elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a real tricky fight. I mean, because Hernandez is a burst offense fighter. He's a blitzer. If you look at him, he is not dissimilar to a very raw Joe Benavidez, I think, is similar to what his general fighting style looks like. And that's something which, you can clearly see he wants to build that into a pace which can break people. But in Donald Cerrone, it ended up kind of breaking himself.
Yeah, like the first time somebody just stood their ground and met him, it ended up destroying.
Donald Cerrone doesn't lose to blitz fighters.
Yeah.
So,
which I think that was your read before that fight, wasn't it, Phil? Did you pick Cerrone in that fight? I think you did.
Yeah.
You clever fucking bastard.
Yep. So the question, Trinaldo is not someone like Cerrone who is as bulletproof against just blitzing in on him. He doesn't have the same kind of Dan Hooker-esque collection of tools for beating people who change levels on him. He is much more about waiting for you to come into that single area where he can land either a big cross or a big body kick. And that is pretty much kind of it. Other than that, he's just going to move around. He's not a beautiful puncher, but he's a big one, and he's accurate and composed.
Yeah, he's very good at identifying that range. He's very good at timing it so that range is reached. He uses that pawing jab. He constantly adjusts his distance. He waits for you to overcommit into that distance where he can really hurt you. So it's a narrow game, but it's one that is, very well suited to Francisco Trinaldo. It's one that he operates really smoothly. But you were saying before, you think there's a pattern of people out physicaling. God, I don't know how to speak. People, out overpowering Trinaldo and just sort of bullying him around. Do you think Hernandez might be able to do that?
Yeah, because Trinaldo is not an efficient fighter, right? He is in anything he does. He's got a big, everything is just kind of, he's thought about it, but it's just a big, raw, explosive double leg, a big cross and a big kick. He does not conserve energy in any way apart from just not doing anything.
Right.
So fighters who have been able to just make him work, make him consistently grapple with them, even if they've gotten into trouble against him, and I'm thinking Michael Chiesa and Kevin Lee here, they've just, by physically forcing a pace on him, they've been able to kind of, it's a slight inversion of the Derek Lewis dynamic. He relies on being physically stronger than his opponent in order to win out in grappling exchanges. If he is not much stronger than them, if they're just more efficient, or if they just have plain, strength parity and a cardio advantage, they can drain his gas tank actually relatively quickly. That was one of the things that shocked me in that Kevin Lee fight, was when Trinaldo had hurt Lee and then grappled with him and was then exhausted.
Yeah. Always the grappling with Lee. Yeah. Is grappling with Hernandez the same? He's physical. Is he as good as Lee?
I was still tremendously impressed by it, that win over Olivier Aubin-Mercier. I mean, considering what OAM did to your boy, Anthony Rocco, he was
true.
That's very impressive for that particular, especially for his level of competition. We got to remember, he's only 3 fights into his UFC career.
Yeah,
there's got to be some serious improvement coming along from this guy.
Yeah, but it also means he's physical enough for this level, but he is severely underdeveloped in a lot of ways as well. And the thing is that Cerrone was able to meet Hernandez in two places that totally prevented him from even setting up his wrestling game, which was the clinch and in the pocket. And I don't know if it matters all that much about conserving energy if, like Cerrone, Trinaldo is just blasting Hernandez every time they exchange. Because Hernandez does not have the striking defense. You know, he does not have the instincts or the skills to stand in punching range and beat someone who knows what they're doing. So I just think like the possibility of OAM was not going to deliver all that damage. OAM was only going to be able to grapple with Hernandez. And that may be a weakness of Trinaldo's, but also the striking is a huge weakness of Hernandez's, I think. The Cerrone fight was not a good look for him.
Yeah, I think it ended up being, from my perspective, it ended up not being a good look from a very specific way, because it wasn't necessarily the fact that Hernandez couldn't get in on or hit Cerrone, especially in the early going. You know, he's clearly very confident and creative. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, he was able to do sort of what he was able to do to Dariush, which is just to leap in, take slightly unpredictable angles and come in with, you know, he'd fake a right hand, come in with a little sneaky left uppercut, this kind of stuff. But it was A, that he started coming into Cerrone shots, but B, it was when Cerrone got him moving backwards was the real problem. Is that because Hernandez would just scuttle backwards at warp speed, being like, I've done this to everyone else, and because they fear me, I've just, you know, I've gotten back and I've been able to reset. And Cerrone would just chase him down the combinations.
Yeah.
And the question is, will Trinaldo do that?
It's a good question.
Does he do that? Does he really chase people down with combinations when they back away from him in that same way?
Yeah, not really.
Because I don't really think he does.
He's much more of a defined back foot counterpuncher.
Yeah. I mean, he'll definitely do stuff like it. I mean, if you think of his fight against Yancy Medeiros, right? That's probably a strange analog for Hernandez, but he's also like defensively incredibly porous. And there were points where Trinaldo would just open up and just bang on Medeiros, just like throwing punch after punch. But it was really only if he could get him up against the cage and he was sure he wasn't going anywhere. He doesn't do the kind of marching combinations thing that like Cerrone or Condit does. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a real key in the Hernandez fight, is that Hernandez, he was like, okay, I blitz in, then I get back out again, and then I can blitz in again. And once he got back out and he realized every time he was trying to get out, he was getting fucked up, that was when it really went downhill for him. So basically, I think I'm going to pick Alexander Hernandez. I mean, it's another fight where I'd really like to be wrong, because I really like Trinaldo and I think he's super cool. And Hernandez seems like a bit of a knob. But
I don't think that's
again. I'm just not sure if Trinaldo is going to make himself chase down Hernandez in order to stop the blitzes from coming again and again. And I'm not sure if Trinaldo can actually afford to clinch up with him as much as he might like, that without getting his gas tank sapped. So yeah, I guess I'm going to take Hernandez, and it's making me sad.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, like, the only fight we've seen of Hernandez's go the distance in which he didn't gas was the one with OAM, where he was just grappling with him. I think introducing those counters, the ability to stand your ground and nail him with hard shots, that is going to have a huge effect on his gas tank. So I'm not super confident that he can, like, I don't take it as a given that he's just going to gas Trinaldo out, having seen him gas within the space of a single round against Donald Cerrone. I think you're right. Like, walking him backwards, that was the point at which it was definitely no longer Hernandez's fight. That was the turn. But he was already thwarted before that point. It was merely Cerrone's ability to stand his ground, to fire back, and to accept the clinches and try to fight there. I think that threw Hernandez off his game and put him in a position where he could then be easily backed up. It was after those exchanges that Cerrone got the chances. And again, we have seen Trinaldo do that at times. I just like the experience and craft of a dude like Tran. Hernandez, I just don't know that brute physicality with but maybe I'm underselling Hernandez's wrestling game here. I'm going to pick Tran, Phil, just because I want him to win.
Yep, I'll take the sadness edge. I'll be more than happy to see Massa and Duba get the win for this one.
Yeah, you probably made the smart decision. I just don't really trust Hernandez to make all the right calls against someone who is trying to fucking take his head off with counters. I just don't trust him to like fight a really smart, relaxed game plan. And as long as he's not doing that, I think this is the kind of fight where I always count on experience.
Yeah. I mean, there's a significant chance that like those 2 wins that he got over OAM and Dariush were just fucking terrible for his career.
Right. Well,
because they're just going to put him in against buzzsaws forever.
Yeah.
He's gonna if he loses this one, they're gonna be like, now fight the Vic Hooker loser, and he's just gonna be like, all right, great.
Pretty much. You don't want to do unexpectedly well as a short notice replacement in the UFC. But yeah, I think I'll take Tran. I just don't trust Hernandez yet. I know, but I feel like you made the better case for your pick. So I am prepared to be depressed, but I'm holding out hope. All right, let's take one more break. When we come back, UFC Durandamy versus Ladd, also known as UFC Fight Night 155 and UFC on ESPN Plus 13. Man, I just love these event titles. We've got Jermaine Durandamy, Aspen Ladd, Faber Simone, Emmett Bektic, Feli Moraes. Phil, you even liked Alan Rodriguez, you sick bastard. And there's more besides. So we're going to get to as much of it as we can. Oh, fuck. Elkins versus Hall. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back. We are going to start with the people's main event of this UFC Fight Night card. Featherweights, Ryan Hall, Darren Elkins, the fight of our times, the defining moment of this era of the UFC and MMA as a whole. Just poetry in motion, Phil.
This was one of the most, in some ways, I say this not like ironically, amazing performances I've seen in a while.
Like I said, I really can't decide if I enjoy this more as a joke or more as a genuine fighting strategy that played out perfectly. Either way, I loved it. It was really, really entertaining. I was wholly invested from start to finish.
Yep. So Ryan Hall has managed to make a completely innovative new style out of spinning back kicks and falling over. And it is kind of awesome just because MMA has been... you can get a solid sense that MMA has moved beyond its early Wild West days. And the ways you can win in this sport are broadly mapped out. And the archetypes and the definitional ways in which people approach the game are all sort of there. And then you get to see something like this, and you're like, is this working? Holy shit, it's working. Again.
I mean, it is essentially a featherweight version of Verdum versus Overeem. It's not like we've never seen this strategy before, but it is perfectly MMA to me. Like, there is no other sport in which you can just effectively respond to a more aggressive opponent by falling over.
Also, Verdum lost.
Well, that's up for debate, Phil. I think he may have deserved that win. I think he got the better of Alistair in that fight, but it's besides the point. Ryan Hall...
It wasn't the level of beating that we saw in this fight.
No. Imagine if Verdum had fucking knocked Overeem down with a spinning kick to the head. That would have been incredible. Also, imagine if he hadn't thrown a single punch, or for most of the fight even appeared to know how to do so.
All part of the plan.
I want to say, like, this strategy of Ryan Hall's is maybe perfectly suited for the version of Darren Elkins he fought here. I don't know how many other kinds of fighters this is going to work against. Like, there were a lot of positions in this fight where Hall was just sort of lazily throwing a kick, and a better striker would have nailed him on the chin with a big clean counter as he's just out of position, leaning backwards on one leg. Way too lackadaisical with his striking. But when he was at the range he needed, like his timing and his accuracy was actually pretty remarkable. It was really just like, I think there's a kind of situational awareness he would need to develop to make this style work against anyone else other than Darren Elkins. But that to me is one of the big stories of this fight. It was hilarious. It was impressive. As you said earlier, Phil, it was also horribly tragic. And I want to note that Darren Elkins looked really bad. Like, not in a fun way. You know, the guy with the damage tattooed on his chest in a zipper font was knocked down, was it 2 or 3 times by...
It was 2 and a half.
Two and
I think
a half.
it was two like spinning hook kicks to the head. And then there was that time when Hall threw his first committed punch of the fight and stunned.
Yeah. Well, if I recall correctly,
Elkins.
he actually buzzed Darren with that straight left in the first round. And then I think like the very next one he tried to throw, I'm pretty sure he dropped him with it in the second or the third.
Maybe you're right.
Just briefly, and created a scramble. He tried to go for a guillotine, I think.
But yeah, it did make me feel like Darren Elkins is shot. It's one thing to get dropped by a like spinning hook kick, even if it's a pretty silly looking one. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to get dropped standing by a punch from Ryan Hall.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't look like it was a super hard punch.
I mean,
so yeah,
accurate.
I think he took tons of damage against Volkanovski and Lamas.
Yeah.
Like, the Lamas fight, you know, that was his first TKO loss, and I think it's not going to be the last. I think we can say that if he's getting that badly fucked up. But yeah, I mean, it was a genuinely terrible game plan. It was exactly the same as what we saw from Gray Maynard against Ryan Hall. It was like, didn't just do anything like just punching at Hall's body to try and catch him on the way down. It was terrible cornering. He clearly lost the second round, and they were like, that was better, keep it up. And rather than being just like, you have to take this guy down and TKO him on the floor. This is your only chance.
Yeah.
Or just, yeah. Just like flying knees, Darren Elkins, if you can do those. Something like that. But yeah, it was both terrible and amazing, and MMA in its entirety.
The lack of the preparation is what really bothered me, though. Like, it's not a great surprise that Darren Elkins has taken so much punishment over the course of his career now that he seems no longer capable of withstanding it. But like, why the fuck did Darren Elkins think he was going to outstrike Ryan Hall? Like, I know Ryan Hall's striking is very silly, but has Darren Elkins watched himself strike? Because it's also very silly, you know. Like, and the other thing is, like, it wasn't just that he was trying to strike with Ryan Hall; it's that he spent the vast majority of the fight in kicking range, like at long kicking range, and seemed way too wary of trying to press through there. Now, getting countered and getting hit is one thing, but you know, like when you get hit with a spinning wheel kick, if you're a super experienced fighter, you should A, either have the response to know, okay, I need to get past the range for that shot, or B, your corner should tell you that. And I don't know. I don't know how much I want to mention this, but I do have it on good authority that the plan for Josh Emmett on this card was to wrestle Mirsad Bektic before some changes were made there. So, like, it does seem like the Team Alpha Male, I know it was actually a really good night for that team. But like, Josh Emmett was going to do to Darren Elkins what to do to Mirsad Bektic what Darren Elkins did. And likewise, they apparently also planned for Darren Elkins to do to Ryan Hall what Gray Maynard did. And both of those game plans demonstrate a profound lack of understanding of what a style matchup is. Those are not replicable performances. Josh Emmett is not Darren Elkins, and Darren Elkins is not Gray Maynard. Also, Gray Maynard lost that fight. So, I just don't get it. Ryan Hall was incredible. Imanari rolls and spin kicks all day. Someone is going to fuck him up for doing this. Someone who is not Darren Elkins, but Darren was looked woefully underprepared and also just physically awful. So it is what it is. Okay, what else? The main event. How much is there to say? Quick stoppage. That's basically the only comment to be made here. Also, Durain Durandamy is genuinely a very good striker, and Aspinlad is not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. Okay, the co-main event, Urijah Faber, Ricky Simone. Also a bit of an early stoppage. Kind of a weird one. A combination early stoppage and a lot of Faber insisting on trying to finish Simone more after the ref had interceded. So nothing good happened there, really.
It didn't make me think that Faber has any better chances against anyone else.
No.
I think, I think we might have mentioned at some point, Simone was the best person who could possibly lose to Urijah Faber, and even then, I'm really not sure about that stoppage.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like it was. I didn't feel like it was like the lad fight where, of the tiny amount of exchanges that they had, you're just like, oh shit, she's just really not a good striker in comparison, is she? It was more that Faber got buzzed by a left hook pretty early in the fight, and I don't feel like Faber's really going anywhere with this.
No. Simone was just too eager, and Urijah Faber has, for a long time now, when he has won, done so because of that counter right hand.
Yeah.
That was the shot that he back when Michael McDonald, that was in 2013, and we were like, oh, Faber's losing a step to this next generation. But if you're over aggressive against him, he is going to try and hit you with a good counter right hand. That's his weapon. So honestly, I would probably still pick Simone if they were to run this fight back quickly. He just needs to be a little less eager at the very beginning of the fight. Is that a good enough read?
Yep, I would do the same.
Okay. How about Josh Emmett and Mirsad Bektic? One of the two actually good fights on this entire card.
Of the two actually good fights, I picked them after coming home from a work party and being drunk, and I picked them wrong. And afterwards, I was like, "Wait, I shouldn't have picked those like that." And immediately, I woke up the next day, and I was just like, "Why did I pick those guys?"
I want to say, there's always the benefit of hindsight, but in retrospect, this looks like a much worse matchup for Mirsad Bektic. I was a little nervous for how well Emmett could actually apply the right strategy, but at the end of the day, as I think I hinted at earlier, there are a couple of key phases here where Emmett is unlike any other opponent Bektic has ever beaten. The two major things, he's a better striker than Bektic. Our friend, the Naked Gambler, Barry, had some... What the hell's Barry's last name again?
Mitchell.
Barry Mitchell? Ugh.
Barry Gambler.
Barry Gambler. He was saying, is he a better striker? And I know, I have my own complaints with Emmett striking. I think he's getting better. Much like Andre Fili, I think he is, he's under some new coaching. I think he's sharpening up that, I really liked what I saw in the third round of his fight with Michael Johnson when he really flipped a switch and started throwing shots away and, going to the body and mixing up his combinations and putting less steam on his shots in order to make them more effective. But the important thing is that he's a much more comfortable striker than Mirsad Bektic. Bektic is one of those super hard punchers who does so because he is anxious. He wants to scare you off or hurt you so bad that you can't hurt him back. And Josh Emmett is not like that. Josh Emmett wants to knock you out. That is why he exchanges with you, because he has faith that he can beat you in an exchange. And the other thing is that Emmett is a phenomenal athlete. And while I would not have liked his chances had he gone in there and tried to do a prolonged wrestling match with Mirsad Bektic, he's athletic enough that he probably could have beaten Bektic in some scrambles here or competed with him. And Bektic is a good scrambler, but where he's really, really suffocating is when he locks down into position and starts slowly beating you and advancing. So I think there are like a couple points here where really it was just a matchup where Bektic was going to have to spend a lot more time striking with Josh Emmett than he wanted to. And yeah, it didn't work out for him.
Yeah, I have a more simplistic read is that Bektic has shown a reasonably suspect chin, and Emmett has proven to be very difficult to hurt and put away. And that was kind of it. Like, I don't really feel like either one of them were particularly nuanced strikes. So I do think Emmett is a more confident one, but I think that may just be at least partially due to the fact that he's just more durable. Like, I think
could be, yeah.
He probably gets himself into less trouble in his sparring with pro boxers, which I can almost certainly imagine is him not doing anything for a long time, and then the guy's thinking, oh, this is a light spar then, and then he just tries to belt them as hard as he fucking can. Yeah, so I mean, I think the striking was pretty even, but then Emmett landed something, and that was it.
That doesn't sound entirely wrong either.
I mean, I did like the fact that it didn't take him until the third round before he started doing things which weren't left hook, right hook.
Right. He was doing a little
he threw a body shot. He threw his first jab of the fight, and it won the fight for him instantly. Go Josh Emmett, I still hate you.
Phil will go on resenting you as you continue your inexplicable rise up the featherweight ranks.
Still look like a poorly rendered Blade 2 villain.
Oh, how dare you! That is one of the most savage insults I've ever heard from your mouth.
Why is everything so out of proportion? All right, I'm done. Let's go back to discussing things.
Okay, well, the other alpha male, who I thought had a really strong performance this night, Andre Fili, Shamo Moraes. What, are you going to tell me how much this sucked too, Phil?
I like Andre Fili.
Yeah, he's actually a very likable guy.
Yeah. Yeah, this was another one where, like, I woke up and I was like, in the same way that other people might have regrets about more significant things. It's like, oh, did I make that pick last night? Did I pick Shamo Moraes over Andre Fili?
You're like, I know I killed that homeless man, but did I pick Shamo Moraes? What the fuck was I thinking?
What is this traffic cone doing in my bed? Yeah, this was a great performance by him. I know you actually looked into this a reasonable amount, so, like, what did you think? Like,
I love the new Andre Fili, dude. Like, I think everyone can see, just like plainly looking at his last 3, maybe 4 fights, like, he has turned a corner as a fighter. Andre Fili used to be, like, really, really amorphous. You know, it was a lot of really reckless, like, look at the fucking Artem Lobov fight. I don't think that fight would go the way it did then with this current version of Andre Fili. I think Artem Lobov would spend a lot more time stuck on the end of a jab. And that's basically it. Like, Fili has just become a more fundamentally sound fighter. Both his technique has become more fundamentally sound, but also his process. It just makes more sense. So, like, his big advantage in this matchup, as you might have guessed if you watched Moraes' fight with Zabit Magomedsharipov, was his reach. And Fili has a good jab. It's been getting increasingly better. I think he just wanted to pressure Moraes from distance with that jab. And then the other thing with Moraes is he's always incredibly susceptible to being hit whenever he's throwing. He puts every ounce of energy and focus into his shots. His defense falls apart. He doesn't see the counters coming. The only thing is that for most people, you know, trading with him is rough because you have to be in the pocket with him, but Fili didn't. So I thought, when Fili read the kicks that Moraes characteristically did not set up and then countered with the straight right and the high kick, that was beautiful. But I really loved that he pressured Moraes to the fence, put feints on him, and made him throw a combination and then knocked him out with the counter to that combination. drawing and re-countering. Like, that is not the type of shit that Andre Fili would have done in that calculated manner a couple of years ago. So I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was, so the thing that made me like wake up and think, hey, what did I do? It was the Fili fight against Hernandez. Because that is the closest analog to Moraes that Fili's ever fought. And he's actually a pretty close analog. He's a better grappler, but he's, a pretty similar, functional, slow-paced, bad Aldo-esque kickboxer.
Mm-hmm. Was it you, by the way? I brought this up to Zane, but was it you who said that Shema Moraes is really just a worse version of Marlon Moraes?
No, it was Zane.
I thought it was Zane.
Bitch.
But I think that's actually true. Like, he's bum Aldo. Not bum, but, bootleg Aldo or bootleg Moraes.
Yeah. I mean, I still think Hernandez is bootleg Aldo, but they're like I said, they're not dissimilar fighters, and it does seem to be a style matchup where Fili is just like, if he sees, like, for whatever reason, I think he puts a lot of value on creativity.
Yes.
And if he sees boring people, he gets a ton of confidence. It just seems like one of the things. If this guy is just like meat and potatoes, like I said, meat and potatoes but no sauce, he's like, man, I'm just gonna out funky this guy. Like, but like you said, he's gotten much better at applying that. Like, he's been less scared off by kicks. He knows, like we were talking about last time, if the other guy throws a kick at you, you don't back off and complain at how much it hurts. You come in afterwards.
Yeah, and you answer.
Force him to exchange.
Mm-hmm. And this was I think, Zane, that asshole, his concern for this was Fili's defense. But it looked all right. Like, his defense is still, I think, just range. But that's better than he used to have, honestly. Like, Fili used to allow a lot more reckless exchanges. The funkiness was very well tailored. And he started this fight throwing like 30 jabs in a row. Right down the center. Yeah. Hard pressure. Like, that is a great way for a guy like Andre Fili to start. I thought it was a really strong performance.
It's the fact that he doesn't abandon his jab anymore.
Yeah.
He doesn't get bored of it. It's one of his best, adaptations.
Because, I mean, shit, the way he's using it now, like, the man's got a really good jab.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, well, I think we're at 20 minutes, so we don't really have time to discuss anything else. I actually would have liked to have talked about Pena and Montano. It was a way more entertaining fight than I expected. Montano's clinch and mat wrestling, I did not see that coming. But Juliana Pena, for all of, like, the sort of mannish fragility she seems to have. I'm not saying she looks mannish. I'm just saying she has a certain kind of, she's a sick jitsu fighter. She has that kind of masculine fragility we talked about in last week's Cold Open. She fought a dogged-ass fight. She really, really, pushed and had to win this fight sheerly on perseverance. And I found...
It really reminded me of the Zingano fight. Because if you watch the first round of either of those fights, you're just like, there is no way she is winning this fight.
Yeah.
She is just getting absolutely, clowned in terms of physical power and wrestling.
She was in a really bad spot after the first round of this one. Like, she was getting beaten up on the ground. So impressive. Juliana Pena still needs to, I would like to see her get better. But as a fighter who does slowly become more aggressive and crazy over the course of a fight, it works for her. So that's that card. And I think that's our show. Phil, do you have anything coming out this week that our listeners should be aware of?
Just the preview of RDA-Edwards, which I'm actually pretty looking forward to writing. I think it's still one of the more purely interesting fights we've seen in ages. What about yourself?
Well, I have a delayed piece on Jorge Masvidal. It didn't come out last week, but I was actually writing a piece talking about how has Masvidal actually changed to become the fighter that he now is? Has he changed, or is he just getting the right kinds of matchups? And I'm doing that by breaking down his matchup with KJ Noons, which has always been a fight that I've really enjoyed.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. Both of those will be coming out on Bloody Elbow, if and when they do come out. Phil's will almost certainly be coming out. Mine, who knows, might take another week. I'll do my best. Otherwise, check out the Patreon. We should have some more bonus shit coming for you guys soon. I need to do some more boxing commentaries and whatnot. But Heavy Hands on Patreon. Lots of bonus episodes. $3 a month. You know the deal. Social media. Twitter. Phil has yet to change his handle since the fall of Greg Jackson is not yet complete. So you can still find him there at Evil Greg Jackson. And you can find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And until next week, thanks for listening, guys. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.